Hi, folks. Nice to be here. Thanks for letting me join you. I'm going to put a nice visual up here um, for us all to share. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of your annual meeting today. I woke up this morning in Portland, Oregon, and now I find myself in the Great Commonwealth, which isn't a travel trek that I do every day, especially in these days. I'm also very pleased to be able to talk to you a little bit about the topic that we have, which is really asking the question of, what is our organization becoming and what are the opportunities for the Barnstable Land Trust? So my big focus for our conversation really is about this concept of what I call becoming a community institution, which to me means that we as an organization are doing what the community needs us to do to really meet that expectation and serve the fundamental requirements of being connected and serving what the community needs. Land conservation in many cases has gotten a bad rap for being relatively isolated, and it's important for us to find ways to connect and engage in the community. The Land Trust Alliance and land trusts across the country have embraced this notion of community conservation, but it's sort of a vague notion. And what I'd like to do is spend a little time talking about what that might look like and how we might embrace this notion of community conservation and how it might help with the work that the Barnstable Land Trust is doing. I think it's important to recognize that this is a very special moment in the organization's life. We have, in everybody's life, this is a really significant time. We have a pandemic crisis. We're in the midst of the beginning of potentially an economic crisis. We have social justice unrest and reconciliation going on. I mean, I think this is really a critical moment when we're trying to do things that matter for every part of our community and still keep our conservation message and work relevant. I think it's important when you think about crisis, we all know this phrase, I suppose, but that crisis has two brush strokes. One of them is danger and one of them is opportunity. And as John F. Kennedy said, in crisis, be aware of danger, but recognize that opportunity. And I believe this is an opportunity for us as conservation groups to step into some parts of our community that we may have neglected and maybe haven't shown the same kind of support and engagement that might have been appropriate. So what I'd like to do is give you some examples by taking you on a little tour of what some land trusts have been doing out there and how they've looked at this notion of how to be relevant and support the needs of the community. So let me give you a couple of quick examples and then maybe we can go into a little more detail. I'm going to give you 7 of them. We're going to talk a little more detail, but let me first start with the Land Trust for North Carolina, a statewide organization that has said equity is a primary focus for us. And our conservation work can't be done unless we do it with an equitable lens at the very beginning. And so they've been leading the country in developing an equity and conservation program. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. In Texas, there's a group, Houston, Texas, group called the Katy Prairie Conservancy that has been protecting land primarily to support stormwater surge. Now, this is an issue that they've, for several decades, thought was a critical priority in the Houston area. There isn't a lot of land zoning or protection that takes place in support of that. So their organization did some great work, and after the last hurricane, they were rewarded for that in the ways in which the public agencies now are supporting the focus and the work that they're doing. In California, the Feather River Conservancy was asking their community about how they could be most relevant, what it is that would be most helpful for them. And when they asked this community that question, the feedback they got was our schools need outdoor classrooms. So the Feather River Conservancy protected land within a 5-minute walk of every school in their entire school district. So every student had access to green spaces and every teacher had an outside classroom that was available to them. So is that an education program or is that a conservation program? I think my answer is yes, it is. In Tennessee, the Tennessee River Gorge Trust has looked at how they can be doing their conservation work to support climate change. And so I'll show you some examples of what they're doing now that's not only protecting their land, it's also supporting their organization while supporting an innovative way to try to support climate change. Also in Tennessee, a statewide organization, the Land Trust for Tennessee, has this great partnership with one of these great old hotels of the area, where they grow the food and support the food needs of that hotel. And then the hotel helps promote and support the Land Trust's work. In this symbiotic relationship, they get to promote their good work, and this great hotel gets great local food. These are all examples of where partnerships have started, where the Land Trust has reached out to the community and the people that support them and said, how can we be doing more? In your state, the Mount Grace Conservation Trust did an interesting partnership. When they were not able to do their event, they partnered with several other land trusts and dedicated the proceeds from a virtual event to their local food bank. Now, the food bank isn't within the mission of the Land Trust, but everybody in their community saw the value and the urgency of supporting that great community institution. And so at that point, the trust said, we can do something about this. My statement is, in the middle of a crisis, there's no such thing as mission creep, and anything we can do to help our community is really critical. And I think Mount Grace has done a really admirable job of demonstrating that. Finally, a group that I want to introduce you to in this conversation a little more is the Low Country Land Trust in Charleston, South Carolina, that when asked to help protect a very special tree, they did a very special thing in bringing people together for that. So I want to go into a little more detail on these three examples, and I'm really glad that we've got a couple of hours together to do this. Wait, I've only got a few more minutes to really cover this, but let me see what we can do to go through a couple of these examples in a little more detail. Let me start with the group in North Carolina, the Conservation Trust with North Carolina. This is a great statewide organization. They've been doing great conservation for a long time, but they reconciled this issue of equity in their most recent strategic plan and recognized that they had to really reconcile their history as a state and as a conservation organization in terms of who conservation lands were benefiting and who was not benefiting. And so they've made a very, very deep investment in equity as the primary driving force behind their conservation work. They've created an internship program specially designed for young people of color to get opportunities to grow and develop professional skills. They have altered their protection criteria to reflect this broader notion of community conservation. And they've entered into this, what's called the Princeville Collaborative, which is a partnership with several other community organizations. And what their focus is on conserving whole communities, not just conserving land. And this notion of when we protect places, we have an obligation to see how those places matter to the cultures and the communities that we're serving. They have embraced that in a spectacular way. They are humble in their work, and they will tell you that they have a long journey ahead. But I can also tell you that in the Land Trust community, the Conservation Trust for North Carolina is way ahead of most land trusts on their equity journey. I really applaud them for their work. And there's much more that you can find out about what they're doing on their website, Conservation Trust for North Carolina. Let me give you another example of what community conservation looks like. Tennessee River Gorge Trust is actively working to protect one of the most beautiful areas in the central part of their state, but they also recognize that their obligations go beyond just the local. The idea of think globally and act locally has been a driving force behind conservation. The Gorge Trust has found a way to both act locally and act globally in their work. So what they've done is that they've entered several of their properties into the California carbon market, which opens the door to them supporting this innovative new carbon market on the West Coast that's really being used nationwide. It's not only supporting this fledgling program, but it is also generating revenue, unrestricted revenue for the Land Trust to support their stewardship agenda. And it gives them a very significant and real contribution to a global crisis that their community is absolutely committed to address. So it's a local project, it's an international project, and it really builds those bridges together. So to me, this is a perfect example of recognizing that when we protect and steward land, we can do that in a way that has extended benefits, benefits way beyond just our local community. In this case, the carbon benefits that are helping everybody on the planet. A great example, and they're really paving the way for other land trusts to be able to explore these kinds of innovative revenue techniques as well. Let me give you one more, and this may be one of my favorite examples of a community conservation project I've ever seen. It's in Charleston, South Carolina. They were asked a long time ago to help protect this tree, the angel oak. And the consequences of that simple step are profound. This land trust, asked by members of the Gullah Geechee community on St. John's Island to protect this iconic tree, stepped into that challenge. They needed to protect something like 36 acres for which this tree was a centerpiece. For many of us, this is not a huge conservation challenge. When they went out to protect this piece of property, what the land trust did was said, we're not going to lead the way, we're going to support the work of the local community to make this happen. So the land trust, instead of leading from the front, found a way to lead from behind. And they found a way to support the leaders of this community in their effort to protect their tree, and the land trust was a partner along the way. So here's an interesting little statistic. For those of you who are interested in metrics, I'll give you a metric. I'm a fundraiser. I actually love fundraising. I love the idea that when I give people a chance to invest in the work of the Barnstable Land Trust, they can make a difference in their contribution. So when they in South Carolina were looking to raise money for the Angel Oak project, they had to raise several $million to make this project work. And to raise several $million, you typically need several hundred contributions to make it happen. They've had over 15,000 contributions to this project. 15,000 from across the world. Let me give you just a sense of what happens when a land trust makes a community conservation project as visible as it truly can be. Okay. Can you hear that? No hearing?
No sound.
Let me just do one quick thing. I apologize.
This is the Angel Oak, or simply the tree to locals. Some say the oldest living thing east of the Mississippi. In the last 500 years, it's weathered more than we'll ever know. Floods, lightning, hurricanes. Battered, but never broken. It stands for the resilience within us all. Carolinas, we're humbled by your strength, and we're here to help.
I don't know if you were able to catch most of that. I apologize if some of that audio didn't come through. But I think what's significant about that is that they've been able to bring together a community to protect someplace that was really important. And they were able to raise the profile of that project such that they were able to put an advertising out there, Allstate did, that really reinforced how significant this was to the local community. So I guess this is the challenge that I'd like to ask of all of you, is to consider now, what would it mean for us to think about bringing community into our conservation work? What would it mean to become the land trust that our community needs? Where can conservation make a difference in ways that matter beyond saving beloved places? You know, it's interesting. I heard Janet mention the idea of protecting land to protect drinking water. Drinking water is the single most compelling conservation issue in America. And that's because people don't see drinking water as a conservation issue. They see it as a health issue. So how can our conservation work be making a difference in health, in child development, in economic development, in all the ways that we think we should? And finally, if we're going to make this happen, how do we develop the relationships and the partnerships that we need to reach further into the community to really be the kind of partner and the kind of effective community-based organization, community institution that our community demands of us right now? So these are questions that I think the Barnstable Land Trust is asking these questions as they go forward with their strategic plan. I hope more and more land trusts are asking these questions, because this is the way that we become relevant to our communities. So I'm going to stop now and see if I can answer some questions, or if there's any other feedback people might have.